We have an exciting panel today. We have 5 amazing people. This is called Science, Ag, Tech Connect because I never did get beyond a working title. But what we have, what we have researchers, entrepreneurs, innovators, catalysts, how science and technology can advance sustainable food systems on land and in the sea. And I'm going to ask our panelists, I don't want to spend any time introducing them, we don't have a lot of time, and each one of them could spend an hour up here talking because they're amazing. So I just want to say, what are you doing to change the world? Who wants to take that one? Who wants to go first? Don't be shy.
I'm happy to jump in.
Do it.
Well, thanks for having me. This is so fun, and I feel so privileged to be among so many thought leaders and advocates for food. My name is Josh, and I work at Microsoft. And I really have the fortune of looking at the food and agricultural system across two different dimensions. You know, we are 130,000 employees that operate on a global scale. Much of the dependencies we have is on energy to power large data centers. And so we do think about how we minimize our own environmental impact. And to that end, you know, how we operate, which is effectively a small city, and deliver sustainable, nutrient-rich food to our employee base. That's sort of one dimension about minimizing our environmental impact while maximizing the sustainable food systems for our employees. But the other and much more exciting dimension is about the role that technology can play in enabling people and organizations all around the world to make better decisions about how to grow and drive better yields. And that's where I'm really excited about the promise and the future of technology. I know technology often gets held up as a panacea for all good things. And I think today, by hopefully the end of the panel, I can convince you that today the time is right for the promise to deliver the results that I think we've long been promised. And so I'm excited to talk to you about a few of those examples.
You want to tell us about the work that you're doing with water and soil sensors at Aero, and tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'll try to be brief because these other panelists have good stories too.
That's right, 5 minutes, no more, anyone, sorry.
Okay, so we have a host of different technologies, one of which is called FarmBeats. And FarmBeats basically solves a few different problems that we see. First of all, that technology is really expensive. And if we're going to propagate these innovations all around the world, we got to drive down the cost. That also means we got to be able to harvest technology from the farms that don't have connectivity. So that's the first mile. And we have technology called TV white space technology, which uses unused white space. Have you ever flipped a channel and seen nothing but white noise? That's a broadcast frequency. And you can broadcast internet broadband speeds over a very long range to bring broadband to rural areas. So that's one. Two, how do you harness the right information from a farm? And we're using novel techniques both in the ground as well as in the sky to piece together heat maps that help farmers ultimately make better decisions about their use. And then third is about packaging up the information. I mean, we're all awash in information. How do you derive the right insights about the information that we have? And that brings novel approaches around artificial intelligence and machine learning to deliver insights to people that can make decisions based on that. And we have a package and suite of technologies called FarmBeats.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, Alina, let's hear about what you do at AeroFarms.
Hi, everyone. It's a privilege and an honor to be here with all of you. So I work at a company called AeroFarms. We're based in Newark, New Jersey. And what we focus on is how to grow fresh, local food without the use of pesticides, herbicides or fungicides all year round at scale. So our company is an indoor aeroponic vertical farming company. I know that's a lot of words, but effectively what that means is that we grow food up instead of out. We do this on minimal land. So our biggest farm and headquarters right now is on the site of a former steel mill in Newark. It's a 70,000 square foot footprint, and it's about an acre of growing space. And on that acre of growing space, we're able to produce around 390 times more food than field farming. And we do this all year round. Our products grow in about 12 to 16 days, what normally takes around 35 to 40 days out in the field. And we do this using technology technology. So instead of optimizing the seed genetics, which is one of the big topics today in agriculture, we're optimizing the environment. So we're experts in understanding how the seed genetics interact with the environment to grow the best plants. And I myself, I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, so I studied nutrition at Cornell, and I oversee marketing at AeroFarms because I believe that all of us need to have access to fresh, healthy food, especially in cities. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, in inner city Brooklyn, and I never saw a farm growing up. And it's really, really cool to see how bringing urban and vertical farming to cities like Newark, to cities like New York, really make an impact on the communities there.
Now explain quickly the difference between your farming, aero farming, and hydroponic, because I'm not sure if everyone understands the difference between what you do and what more people understand hydroponic growing.
Absolutely. So in hydroponics, the medium for nutrient delivery is water. So it typically happens in hydroponic systems. There's a variety of different types of hydroponic systems. What happens is that the roots are typically submerged in water, and then plants grow that way. So it's a soilless medium. What we do at AeroFarms is we grow on a cloth medium. The cloth itself is reusable, so we reuse it over and over again. Usually in hydroponic systems, the medium is rock wool or coco coir, and those media are usually thrown out. So inherently there's a closed loop system there, which is great. And what we do is we deliver nutrients using aeroponics. So we're misting the roots with nutrients, which allows more precision and a faster growing cycle.
And what about water use?
So we use about 95% less water than field farming and 30 to 40% less than in hydroponics. And water, we've been talking a lot about food. And 70% of the world's fresh water is going to agriculture. And at the same time, 70% of the world's freshwater contamination is coming from agriculture, from all those agrochemicals and pesticides and all that runoff. So we're really in a water crisis. And our CEO, David Rosenberg, his main mission for co-founding AeroFarms was to solve the water crisis. If we want to solve water, we have to solve food. So how do we do that? How do we grow food with less water? Because we're really going to need to get that right for the 21st century if we're going to feed our growing population.
Thank you. Now, well, since we're going down the road, Ryland, you have an idea, a foundation, a vision that is decidedly high tech and low tech all at the same time. So tell us about what you do.
Yes, thank you so much, Michelle, for the invitation to be here. So yeah, my name is Ryland Englehart. I've been in the food space before it was a space. My family started Cafe Gratitude 15 years ago, and we've been changing people's minds about plant-based cuisine and about how that can be part of a lifestyle, not necessarily a dogma. And in the last 5 years, I've worked on changing a new perspective or a new way of thinking towards regeneration. And I co-founded an organization called Kiss the Ground, which was founded on the idea that through building healthy soil, we can take carbon that's a problem in the atmosphere and put it in the soil and make it a solution there. And that being that we're all eaters, that would be a cross party line. Everyone could get on board, that we could make healthy food that would also solve one of our greatest challenges. And when I realized that that was a story that was the most compelling thing that I'd ever heard in my life, and that 7 years ago that wasn't a big story. If you looked up YouTube videos, there was no story about that. And so we founded an organization called Kiss the Ground to really change the paradigm of thinking that regeneration is possible. So technology is it's an interesting thing. One of the things that we've said about within Kiss the Ground is that there's been 500 million years of research and development in nature's technology. And that there's a little bit of human arrogance in our technology that oftentimes tries to solve one little problem, but doesn't actually see all the other problems it actually causes. And so we've been creating media around this opportunity of carbon sequestration and regeneration and regenerative agriculture as a solution to feeding a growing population as well as cooling the planet. So some of the practical projects that we've been working on, we have a farmland program that is designed for restaurants to get involved by putting an item on their restaurant menu that tells the promise of regenerative agriculture and they can charge the $2 more for that item, and a customer is oftentimes happy to pay for that, and that $2 then goes to training farmers in practices and principles of regenerative agriculture. So that's a program that we've launched in Los Angeles. We have about 7 to 8 restaurants that have joined on board there. We've also created a 6th grade educational curriculum called the Soil Story Curriculum that's designed to go right into the 6th grade photosynthesis science core education to have them understand at a deeper level. We understood that photosynthesis was carbon being pulled out of the atmosphere and making oxygen for us to breathe, but what we oftentimes didn't understand is that it's grabbing that carbon and sending 30 to sometimes 70% of that carbon into the ground. And if we kept that carbon in the ground, that would actually be the greatest mechanism for reversing global warming. So having young people understanding this, which actually gives them a horizon, a hopeful horizon for what the future actually brings. Because I was recently just at a conference where Al Gore was asked, if we turned all the cars electric tomorrow and we stopped all the power plants from burning fossil fuels, would that be enough? And he said no, that we actually have to really start thinking about planting more trees, which we've known about for a long time, but what he newly said is that we need to start supporting regenerative organic agriculture and putting that carbon back in our soil. So it was a big, big win in this new idea that's time has come.
So you talked about some of the educational programs that you have and restaurant programs, and even some of the short video projects. We saw one a little while ago, but also there's a documentary film coming out. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, we've been co-producing a documentary film that's named Kiss the Ground, and it is featuring some of the most amazing regenerative farmers and farmer trainers here in this country, showing 5,000-acre farms that have been able to, over the last 10 years, be able to produce an unbelievably economically viable farming model, while building soil organic matter from 2% to 6%. So this unbelievable ability to generate a large amount of food while sequestering a ton of carbon into the ground. And so that's really the big idea, is if we can actually have a food system that is being able to produce more calories on top of the ground and putting more carbon into the ground, that is the most extraordinary opportunity of our lifetime.
I've got one more follow-up, because like David Bronner, you have historically been more of a plant-based eater, and you certainly run and own a plant-based restaurant. But like him, you've sort of begun to articulate a regenitarianism. What do you mean by that, and what's the difference to you, and why does it matter?
I've kind of disregarded the regenitarian. I think it's too hard to say. So I've been liking to say
I was proud that I got
a regenerative diet, eating foods that regenerate landscapes, a regenerative diet. So yes, I've been a plant-based, a vegan, vegetarian for the last. I'm 38 years old. I didn't have a hamburger until I was 35, and I ate a hamburger because I actually took it upon me and my family took it upon ourselves to actually kill one of the cows that was on our farm. And because we actually really wanted to go through the process of understanding that there is going to be little sacrifices for a greater life of an ecosystem. And that we started farming as raw vegans about 12 years ago on a piece of land, and we started realizing, how are we going to keep this land fertile? Because we didn't have any animals, we just had growing plants. But yet we were oftentimes relying on dead animals or feces that were coming from animals that were about to be killed, and yet to grow these vegetables. And instead we said, no, we actually want to have cows that we're stewarding, we're caring for, and that are cycling nutrients on our piece of land, and that land gets healthier over our care and under their care. And there's people who on that farm ate meat, and so we made the choice to go through that process. And that was actually where I had the first hamburger after 35 years of vegetarianism, because I really started to understand it's not just as simple as no meat, that's a better choice. There's actually, I think as the billboards go, there is a plant-based billboard is at the top of the chart of saying we need to eat more plants. and the majority of the meat that we're consuming is completely degenerative, as far as the morality of how animals are being treated, as far as the chemicals used to produce them, and all the things that go downstream from that. And if we want to really think about how we're going to regenerate large plots of land, we are going to need animals in partnership with ourselves. And that is, to my knowledge, really one of the best opportunities that we have as human beings, is how are we going to restore landscapes and bring carbon back down. And we do need large grass-eating animals as our partners to do that.
When does the film come out?
Film comes out probably first or second quarter in 2019, and it's going to be a really, really extraordinary film with some amazing farmers from across this country, really showing how we can do large plots of land and produce lots of money for farmers and produce amazing amounts of carbon going back into the soils.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, Gabe, you're at the Youtsey Office of the President, and you actually work with innovators and sort of out-of-the-box thinkers and bring them together. Tell us about the work that you do within the Youtsey system.
So I work for this amazing community called Youtsey Agriculture and Natural Resources. It's a network across the state, and it's been in place for over 100 years. It's Berkeley, it's Davis, it's Riverside, it's offices in every single county. It's all these amazing researchers, educators, problem solvers. You often refer to them as scientists with muddy boots, because they are out in the communities. They're at events like this. You're going to hear from Rachel Searles later. And they're in the thick of the fray, bringing science from the campuses and applying it to solve real-world problems. So we've always been a network. We've always been a community thinking about youth with 4-H, cooperative extension, where we're actually partnering with farmers and government officials and other researchers and companies. The lens that I bring to the table, I'm a technologist by background. I've always been a foodie and a food and ag aware person, but I get to do something now which I'm loving to do, which is think about how to catalyze innovation and bring both technology but also new ways of business models and helping rural communities. We care a lot for rural communities where we sit from the university, because we're in all of them, including places like Chico that were devastated, where we have several of our staff lose homes in that area. But thinking about how we can catalyze innovation and entrepreneurship in completely new ways through the lens of technology, and include our rural communities in those activities. So there's a lot of really hot activity happening in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Ag tech companies are starting up by the minute almost. But our farmers don't know what to make of it all. Our small communities are not very participatory yet in all this wave of investment and innovation. So my role in this new network that we've created called Divine is to bridge that activity and to
Community up to the university.
And it's actually really about bringing researchers and farmers and small communities and big high tech together in new ways that we can co-create the future of food and agriculture together. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. I want to come back to a minute, because a couple of you have said some things, and you mentioned the fires, and I want to talk a little bit about some of how the work you're doing actually, which is largely focused on agriculture, however, could be applicable in the context in which we're currently operating, which is, the West is on fire. Before I come back to that, however, I want to let Sarah get a word in and tell us about the amazing work she does just down the road.
Thanks very much. I'm Sarah Mesnick, and it's a pleasure, Michelle, to be here. And I also have the honor of being the fish person, the marine person here.
That's right.
And I wanted to first ask, how many people are from San Diego in this room? All right, it's about half. Well, you are really lucky to be here, because to me, in my mind, San Diego is pretty much, arguably, I'll take anyone on, that I think we're leading in sustainable seafood, not just in the US, but in the world. Woo! And the reason, and the reason for that is some of the things that you just touched on is that the San Diego community has a history of bridging these gaps. So I work at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. We're part of NOAA, so we're a federal laboratory. We sit on the campus of Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and if we look out our windows, we see some of the nation, and if not the world's, most experienced, innovative fishermen. And we turn around and we go to restaurants where chefs and the people that go into those restaurants are interested in where their food comes from. And I think that this has created, a sea change in how we are looking at our marine food supply and bringing together all of this knowledge from these different paralleled and once upon a time, not long ago, siloed communities. We're working together, talking with each other. And one of the things I noticed the other day was I was at a conference and a bunch of us were there and the kids of some of the folks were there. And these kids, a fisherman's kid, a chef's kid, and a scientist's kid, they've all grown up together now. So they don't see these barriers between these different ways of knowing about the ocean and about seafood. And so I think that a couple people have mentioned that breaking down these barriers, breaking down walls right now is really powerful for getting information to flow. So at Southwest Fisheries Science Center, we're a government lab. We're about 300 scientists here along the California coast, but around the country. And we generate the scientific information that is used for sustainable fisheries. And we're really lucky in this country. We have a number of laws, Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Endangered Species Act, that the foresight years ago was that we would end overfishing, we would reduce bycatch, we would reduce our impact on the marine environment, and we would support local fishing communities. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this particular session, and a couple people have mentioned it, I think we're at a really remarkable time where we have all of this technology in our hands, and at the same time, we're reconnecting to our roots. And so what I mean by that is we can use the best technology now to monitor fish populations in near real time. We can use satellite technology to look at oceanographic conditions. We can write programs that tell fishermen, you can go here to maximize your catch, but minimize your impact on the environment. We can do that in near real time. We can use blockchain technology to trace seafood from, that fisherman's hook right to your table. But at the same time, when you land that fish and it lands on your plate, to be able to instill this passion for that animal, which may have crossed the entire Pacific to get on your plate. And then what I like saying is to cook it like your grandmother, whoever your grandmother is, that none of that goes to waste. So you eat not just the fillet, but you eat that whole fish, and there may be other products derived from that fish. So we're eating like our grandmother on one hand, but using the best of technology to make the minimum impact on the environment when we're catching those fish.
You also talk a lot about underloved, underappreciated species. Like the problem is as eaters, right? We want to have salmon 7 days a week when we go out and eat fish, and they don't even live here, So what is it that you do with the local fishermen and chefs in that regard?
Yeah, so I like the term underloved species. Underutilized, we also hear a lot, but it's really interesting to those of us who are in tune with our fish that if you want to introduce the weirdest flavor of ice cream, it goes over. Like you can go and ice cream, there's just like really weird stuff going. Uni ice cream, and but in fish, people have really reticent to take a bite of something that's not a salmon or a shrimp or a tuna. So one of the things in eating seasonally is certain species are available at certain seasons, and when they're not, asking the local fishermen what is available, and it may be something you haven't tasted. And so to introduce this, and again, it's where we're working with local fishermen, chefs, charismatic megafauna chefs can take something, make it delicious, something you've never heard of, like an opa, and make it delicious, introduce it, and then help fishermen to have a diversity of catch, which will minimize pressure on certain species that everybody usually focuses on.
And I want one follow-up, because we're talking a lot about how research and science and technology can help the current environment in which we're living. But you are also teaching future scientists in a way that I think is unique, and I'd like you to talk about that for just a second.
Yeah. So I'm very lucky. I mentioned that our building sits on the campus of Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and so I also have a position there. We started the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation. I teach a sustainable seafood class. And really, part of that is selfish, that we want the best and the brightest to go become employees for the government. So part of that is selfish, but the other part is students these days are coming in and they want to make a difference. They don't want to just become an academic for academic's sake. So how do we put together programs that are deep? So you become a PhD or a master's student in a field of study where you're the expert, but also broad. And so one of the things we like to do is integrate that education across the supply chain. So a student is getting a deep education, but they're also exposed to all of these different fields from the very beginning.
Like fishermen and chefs.
Chefs,
community members.
Producers, processors, because an idea that is an academic idea sometimes makes absolutely no sense in the real world. And if we can if we can use design thinking really early on, so people work in teams and they're out on a fishing boat, they're at the docks, they're in seeing a process or what happens to the product. And then when they come up with an idea, they've got all these things in their minds. And not only are they more excited that their energy is going to make a difference, but also it's more realistic.
I want to let anyone who wants to respond or comment to this, please do. And then I'd like to sort of come back again to sort of the technology and how it might affect, how we might be able to utilize it, if not now, in the future, in the fire situation that we're currently experiencing. Anyone want to chime in? No, I asked these guys before, like I said, just interrupt each other.
What was the exact question again?
Do you want to respond to,
to
anything you want to add to anything that's been said? This is, a dialogue. You guys everyone's a little quiet up here. It's the after lunch break, but.
Yeah, I want to highlight this growing young innovators, and it's something that we think a lot about in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that we're trying is bringing high school kids from very disparate backgrounds, oftentimes from inner city environments. And we did this last year at UC Davis, where we had our curriculum was data science, but we went through every aspect, any professor that would say yes to giving a lecture. So I had an aquaponics guy, aquaculture guy. I had a indoor soilless culture expert. I had a horticulture field agronomy expert. I had a no-till. So they actually went through as many aspects of agriculture in the context of learning a technology curriculum at the same time. And bringing together these disciplines in completely new ways is something that I'm really, really interested in figuring out new ways that we can do that, both for the kids who are going to go on to and get four-year degrees and master's degrees and PhDs, but also in our community colleges, where we're training up people who are going to work in our food systems in our communities. They're desperately working on these bringing together kids and getting them interested in our food system from the earliest days in California. There's colleges, even in rural communities, where they're trying to keep kids there. So supporting those efforts is a really important aspect of all this.
Just to comment on that, that's one of the things we're trying to tap into as well at Microsoft, which is, how can we bring the advancements that we all have experienced? We know more about the buying behaviors of a middle-aged woman in Minnesota than we do about some of the natural resources that we all depend on and that we're talking about here today. So how can we bring some of those same innovations that are available to this space that we all care about and will increasingly depend on? And one of the things that we launched last year is this program called AI for Earth, which is a $50 million 5-year program dedicated to packaging up the technologies that Microsoft has available and putting them in the hands of the people and organizations at the front lines of these important issues, the issues that we're talking about here today. And how do we both give you that access for free, but also train you on the novel approaches to applying those techniques to overcome the obstacles that we're all experiencing today. And so I think, finding and lifting up best practices from other industries, from other places where we're more mature, and bringing them into this field is something that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. And just to jump in real quick, since you want us to jump in, the first statistic that I find really staggering is the average age of a farmer in the United States, which is around in the late 50s. And I went to an ag school, and so I met a bunch of folks that are now farming full-time that are of my generation, of my age, but the vast majority of kids are not taking over their family farms. And so we are actually in a crisis in terms of finding people who want to continue to farm and grow food for us. And yet we have a growing population, more mouths to feed, more people entering the middle class. And so there's, it's really a big issue. And what's really cool about indoor agriculture is that it's inspiring a whole new generation of people that are interested in technology, interested in software, interested in engineering, also interested in biology, and bringing that all together. And the other thing is that most of us are going to be living in cities, mega cities, right? So like the statistic is something like 70% of the population is going to be living in cities by 2050. And so to keep the folks there and still produce enough food is an interesting question. So I think vertical farming, indoor agriculture, urban farming, these are disciplines that are super interesting and can get so many new folks involved. And in our first farm, in Newark was actually in a school, in a K-8 school called Phillips Academy Charter School. And the kids, the 6th graders, grow their own food. It's a 2-level system. Our systems are modular and they're scalable, so they can be as big or as small as the building or the setting. And they've been growing their food there since 2009, and then they harvest it and eat it right in their cafeteria. And those kids, a lot of them go on to study science and engineering from inner city Newark. And so it's really an inspiring thing to think about.
And we have a similar situation with fishermen, that the fishermen today are aging. And so how do we get younger people into even thinking about that as a career? And here in San Diego with this big, long coast, you don't see a lot of fishermen. So we also have internship programs that are exposing students in high schools to fishing or college to fishing as a career. But the similar thing that you were mentioning is the advent of aquaculture. And aquaculture has, just as you were mentioning, it's got this opportunity to merge thinking about ocean products in a very different way. We also can learn from all sorts of experiences in land and hopefully take the best of those experiences. So it's a field, and a new field opening up. It's got tons of potential because we have an increasing population. We do not have increasing fish populations. The fish of the future, part of that is going to need to come from our ability to maintain our wild populations well and end overfishing. But the other part will be coming from aquaculture. So it's an area that if you're a student and you want to make a difference in the world, if you are tech savvy but you love fish and you love to eat, it's a field that's going to be really growing in the near future. So I think that for the students of the future, being able to merge these things is really great. I fear, though, for the, not going outside. So, and knowing where real food comes from the dirt or from the ocean. So I think one of our challenges is going to be to meld the wild with
It's a supplement. It's not a replacement.
Right,
Just
exactly.
as on in the sea, so is on land. Of course, the elephant in the room that we're not talking about is food waste, because we spend a lot of time talking about how we're going to feed everybody, but we could spend all day. And in fact, there was a food tank conference about this not too long ago, and you can watch it online. But that if we stopped wasting 50% more or less of the food that we produced, maybe we wouldn't be here. But that's a whole nother conference. So let me just, does anyone have any, do you want to say anything, Josh, about fire and whether your technology, which is water and sensors and so on, has any application, whether now in the future?
I'll say, generally speaking, that the concept of precision agriculture is probably well understood in this room. It's about applying data and information to more precise decisions that ultimately result in higher yields and lower resource inputs. And that same technique is being applied to a broader space called precision conservation. And part of the foundation of that is having up-to-date information. And so we've done some work, for example, with an organization in the East Coast called Chesapeake Conservancy. They've effectively mapped the entire Chesapeake Bay, not at a 30 or 50 meter resolution, which is interesting but not super applicable or helpful, but at a 1 meter resolution, and actually turn that into a data set that they can query. So they can look at a given plot and say, how much green space is in this area, right? Or how much riparian buffer would I need to implement to mitigate this 30-acre parcel of runoff? So by applying these precision conservation approaches using information technology, they're able to be much more precise and directive with their investments. And I think that is the same opportunity with information paired with sort of human ingenuity to take these data-driven approaches to understanding how wildfires spread, for example, and implementing those measures in kind of a more informed way.
So it's time for us to start taking questions from the audience. I think we could talk here all day. This is a full panel. So somewhere someone has a microphone, and we'll start taking audience questions. So I think it's that time. Without my glasses, you guys are an impressionist painting. So if I miss you, wavy.
One question.
Right here, and here's a microphone coming your way. And if I don't recognize you, that's why.
One thing technologically over the past few years, there's been a really boom in understanding of soil. A teaspoon of soil contains billions of microbes. And I mean, metagenomics in the past few years have helped us identify what some of those microbes, in eukaryotes and bacteria and archaea do. And I think in understanding, they have a big role in terms of climate change, drought resistance, for example, with water. For every 1% of soil carbon you increase the capacity of the top 6 inches of soil to hold 26,000 gallons of water. So, a lot of these solutions are things that farmers are doing in Middle America that aren't being done very extensively on the West Coast, that don't require as much expense on chemical inputs and other fancy technology. And it really comes down to just better understanding how the biology works. So, I mean, I think I would like to hear some of that discussed. Maybe Ryland can top.
I was going to say, Ryland, that sounds like you.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a technology panel, but I think I'm totally pro science, pro technology supporting our food system. But the thing that blew my mind and had me be very inspired about soil was simply that I had been in the organic food business for 15 or 10 years and had no idea how carbon cycled and how the opportunity of our food system could also be a solution for reversing or mitigating climate change. So the opportunity of technology is, creating sensor systems that can discover or see how much water is in the soil or see how much carbon potentially is in the soil. So, I mean, technology, absolutely. I think there's an amazing opportunity. Some have said this opportunity of the eagle and the condor flying together being this, ancestral wisdom of understanding the cycle of life, that we're part of a circle, and using, this modern mind of, technology and the ability to use these tools to have that technology being guided by our hearts and by actually love. And that if we actually love this planet, if we love our children, if we love what will happen in generations to come, we'd start using these technologies so that it would support our understanding and support the biological systems to get healthier and healthier over time. And so, yes, that's the opportunity of, from my view, how technology can support us, but really we have to start thinking differently, thinking that we are part of a biological system, and if we take our right role, if we become the right keystone species in the overall ecosystem, we can have the ecosystem get healthier under our care. But we don't think like that. We think that we have to do something with machines and computers more so than working with nature and the biology of the soil and having a certain amount of animals on certain plots of land, so that mimics something that has been worked out for so much longer than our intellect has been around, and yet the system continues to feed all those that need to depend on that system while the system remains healthy. And so that's the opportunity that we need to start thinking through, is through this idea of how we can be part of the biological system so the system gets healthier under our care.
That's what I meant when I said before that you really articulate something that's both high-tech and low-tech. And what I meant was low-tech in the sense that it is what you just said, but high-tech in that it's being now corroborated by research among soil scientists at Berkeley and other institutions who are corroborating through modern scientific research what we know and what you've talked about and what farmers have known for, as long as humans have existed. So anybody, who's next? Here, sorry, right here.
It's a quick question. Have you heard anything about a trash fish kitchen where you harvest the fish and you have to cook what's available to you and cook a meal?
Yeah.
So can you gamify it?
Yeah. Yes. So good question. So the
Repeat that in
question
case,
was,
yeah.
the question was about a trash fish kitchen. And it just so happens that we are looking at establishing a kitchen on the campus of Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where scientists and fishermen and chefs can come together and do just that kind of thing, where we can take a fish, take it apart, and see what do you do with all the parts. So from eating them, but also using fish skin as a bandage, using collagen for health products, using all parts of the fish. And the advantage of that is people will be able to utilize the whole fish, get an appreciation for underutilized things that they could be eating. And it happens that this kitchen is right by the multimedia center. So we'd like to perhaps turn that into, as you said, can you gamify it? Can you bring in chefs, challenge them, have them pair with a scientist so they know what the fish is, where it lived, what its life is like, and then take it all the way to the plate and do it in a way that's engaging. And that is exactly what we'd like to do. So we'll make sure you get an invitation.
There's the one here. And I'm sorry, if there's someone over here, I can't see
I have a
the
mic.
podium, but yeah, you guys take charge. Whoever's the mic. Oh, sorry.
So my question is, first of all, thank you for sharing all your innovations that you're doing in the food system. My question is about the scaling it up and talking about the biggest obstacles that you might see in integrating these innovations into our everyday actions. So whether it's more funding, more resources, are there local government entities, local policies that could really enhance and integrate these innovations more heavily into our society? Sort of the opportunities for growth and the greatest obstacles you see with scaling up these technologies.
Who wants to tackle that?
I'll start. Maybe we could zip down because I bet we all have a lot. One thing I think is really important is having people eat differently. Just being able to be open to eating things that that didn't come out of a box or that aren't in a package, and eating like your grandmother. So eating more widely, understanding what you're eating and where it's coming from. So I see part of this being a communications campaign and education about food.
I'll say that oftentimes the pathway that I'm focused on is to create sustainable business approaches to these various models. And it's very hard oftentimes in our world to find funding for these things, to get things started. One of the models that I'm excited about that provides ownership, and you mentioned farmers are not taking up farming, particularly on established farms, but on the flip side, it's also really hard to get a new farm started, to get the money going in the land, because there's so much capital investment. So there's new cooperative models. The cooperative models have long been a way to provide a path to ownership in farm and food systems. But there's new interest and I'd say new life in platform cooperatives and investable models that provide ownership for the smallest of small farmers, whether they're here in the US or they're all over the world, that provide them a stake in the operations and a stake in the success of the model and of the business. And I think that's one of the pathways is building on these models have been around, but thinking about new innovative ways to provide ownership, whether it's a farm, whether it's an indoor farm, whether it's a coffee company. There's these new models that provide ownership, but provide scaling, and they're investable. I'm excited about those.
Yeah. If I could just tack on, I think something that pairs well with the principles and processes Ryland was talking about earlier is, the opportunity for technology to share the practices and the benefits of regenerative farming as one example with other communities and other populations beyond sort of a concentrated group of regenerative farmers, for example. That's one dimension. And then the other is simply democratizing access, through some of the applications and APIs that are sort of new approaches to distributing these resources. You don't have to be a data scientist or a software engineer to be able to harness some of the capabilities that are available in machine learning and artificial intelligence to derive insights about how much moisture is in your soil. It should be as easy as downloading it from the App Center, if you will, and applying it to the data set that you have about your local, small, or large farm.
I think we have time for one more.
Can I just say one more thing?
Sorry, go ahead, Ryland.
Yeah, just as far as what we've been looking at how to do over the last 5 years is pathways for people to participate.
Yeah.
And so that's always the most, and what we started telling the story 5 years ago about how soil can be a sink for carbon, and over the last 5 years, I think we have maybe 50 million impressions that we've been able to tell that story over social media. So, and it started off with, this little video called The Soil Story. So, that's one way that we're engaging, restoring a possibility. We have to create a new mythology called what's possible if we actually can use agriculture to reverse global warming. That's a new mythology. That's a new story that's possible. So, share that story. The second way, we're educating youth. So I'm asking you, this room, if you're educators, if you have any connections to schools, we have an amazing, free, beautifully designed, Life Lab created soil story curriculum that's ready to go into your classrooms of your schools. And so please, contact us. We'd love to give you that curriculum, get you set up to do that. The other thing is we have this restaurant program. If those have your favorite restaurant, we'd love to get a dish on that restaurant menu that is having money diverted to training farmers to do regenerative agriculture. That's, we've heard the big opportunity of in the next 10 years, the majority or many farmers in this country will be passing on, and it'll be the largest transfer of land since the Louisiana Purchase, someone told me, and the question of whose hands that farming land is going to be in and what kind of practices they're going to be doing, is very, very critical and key. So, here's a way that eaters, chefs, and restaurants can get involved and actually diverting money, telling a good story, getting a good marketing, campaign, while actually changing their supply chain. So supporting that program. And then we have another program called the Advocacy Training. We're actually training people in 6 weeks to be professional spokespeople on behalf of regeneration in soil. And you can go and speak at your schools, at universities, around the principles of regeneration and how regenerative agriculture can be a solution to food security as well as mitigating climate change. So we have about 500 students that have graduated that are now being in the world, speaking this language and getting this story proliferating, and that's in 15 different countries that's happened over the last 6 months. So also participate in that program as well. So thank you so much.
Since I'm the last person that didn't say anything, let me just finish this one off, top it off. What I'll say is in terms of scaling for what we're doing, so really interesting story. So AeroFarms actually started in the early 2000s by Dr. Ed Harwood, a former Cornell professor, and he was a dairy science professor, and he was the first person to put a computer on a dairy farm. Totally new way of thinking. So he minored in artificial intelligence in like the 60s. The point is, like, we're vertical farming, indoor agriculture, it's a brand new field in a lot of ways. We're still we're learning how to do this. And so I think there's a big opportunity in terms of in order to scale this way of farming. We need people that are not just experts in a narrow discipline. We need people that really can understand multidisciplinary subjects. So like I mentioned, engineering, biology, nutrition, culinary, etc. So it's really getting outside the box of thinking, I need to study this one narrow field, and thinking about how systems work together, because that's what nature is. It's a big multidisciplinary subject and an exciting one. So.
Last question before we get the hook.
Last question. Thank you. This is such a wonderful panel. I'm Claire from the LA Food Policy Council. And
give it up for Claire. We love you.
Ryland, I love you. My question is related to what you were just talking about, Alina and Sarah. You touched on it, and Ryland as well. I'm just wondering, as we look to the growth of food tech, and we haven't even really talked about like lab-based food, but there's a lot of emerging industry, and there's a need for a new kind of workforce. So what are the whole panel's thoughts on a workforce development strategy that specifically opens up job opportunities and career pathways for low-income communities? I'm really thinking about in LA, the growth of Silicon Beach, which is like 10 minutes down the road from South LA, which is the largest food desert in LA. And so how do we link these initiatives around, good food for all, but also having a really intelligent workforce development strategy that opens up these tech opportunities for historically disadvantaged communities?
Great question.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I mean, what I would say is, first and foremost, like I mentioned, Phillips Academy Charter School in Newark, our partner, if you have time to check them out, they're an incredible school for a variety of reasons. So Newark, that school is in a historically disadvantaged community, food desert, et cetera. But those kids, from an early age, their entire curriculum is based on nutrition, food. They integrate the nutrition knowledge and culinary knowledge from kindergarten throughout all of their materials. So when they're counting carrots, and then they're growing them on their rooftop farm, and then they're growing greens in a high-tech AeroFarms growing system, and harvesting them on site, then eating them in their kitchen, right, in their cafeteria. And so they have chefs. They don't have cooks, the kitchen staff. They have chefs, and they learn cooking skills. They learn culinary skills, and all those kids come out with a better understanding of technology, farming, science, culinary, food, health, et cetera. Then they go out and they spread that out to their families. So, a healthy workforce starts with healthy kids. A healthy mind needs nourishment and healthy food. So I think all that plays together. So investing in schools, investing in education that's centered around growing food, eating healthy food, cooking, nutrition, I think is one of the best investments that we can make.
I just want to follow up with you, what you said, though, because you told me before the panel that your farm is urban located and 80% of the workforce is from that community and it's a fair wage. I think that's a good example. I mean, your business model is a perfect example because it can locate in areas. You can train people to do the work that you're talking about. It's a fair wage. They will get access to good and healthy produce, so there's a win-win-win. It's also an excellent opportunity for the kind of work that you're doing with public and private partnerships to encourage businesses to come to areas where there's a need for jobs, there's a need for education, there's a need for healthy, sustainable food. I mean, the opportunities are limitless. We have to do a lot more out-of-the-box thinking.
Definitely, and just to finish it off, I mean, we hire a lot of folks who are formerly incarcerated, for example, provide on-the-job training. That's very challenging. Finding a workforce that can do and fulfill the needs of our business is not easy for any business, for any manufacturing operation and farming operation. But we make that extra investment because we believe in it. So I think that's also important. You have to take chances, and you have to do the right thing. So,
anyone else?
Yeah, I wanted to just add to that. I thought your answer was brilliant, and I really appreciate the question too. One of the things we've been doing is actually focusing on the community college level and merging. We have a lot of culinary programs, but merging those with science programs early on, so that these, again, breaking down silos, and that's seeing if you want to save the oceans. A lot of people think, well, how many marine biologists are there in the world? But actually, being a chef that understands how food is going to make a difference, whether it's on land or for the ocean, that chef or someone in a kitchen can probably make as big a difference paired with the science as a scientist. We're better together. So looking at how to bridge that early on in the education system and let people know that the work they do one bite at a time is really changing the planet, that is a real powerful message. And so people that produce or cook or process food are part of the solution, and merging them right away with the science so they know why and how they can make a difference.
Thank you for your attention. Thank you, panelists. You can probably find them during the break and at the reception at the end of the day.